Hi, welcome to my channel and thank you to my subscribers. If you have not already subscribed to this channel, please subscribe. In this video, we are going to see how to integrate a Spring Boot web application with Azure Active Directory using the OpenID Connect protocol. So before getting into the configuration steps, I will explain the end-to-end flow on how a user will log into a Spring Boot web application using Azure Active Directory. So when the user tries to access the web application in step 1, the Spring Boot web app will do a redirect to the Azure Active Directory's authorized endpoint through a browser. Like basically it's a URL redirect in the browser. And Azure Active Directory will then display the login page, provided that Spring Boot web application is configured in the Active Directory, the Azure Active Directory. So if it is properly configured, then it will display the login page. And then the user needs to enter the credentials, and once the credentials are submitted to Azure Active Directory, it will validate the credentials, and if it is successful, it will redirect back to the Spring Boot web app with an authorization code. And that's what happens in step number 6. So it is again a browser redirect back to the Spring Boot web app. And then Spring Boot web app will use that authorization code to call the token endpoint in Azure Active Directory and get the tokens. So once the tokens are obtained, Spring Boot web app will automatically validate the tokens and display the home page of your application. And anywhere during this flow, like for example, if the token validation fails, or if the Spring Boot web app is not properly configured in Azure Active Directory, you will see an error in the browser. So the good thing with this with the Spring Boot web app is that it already has libraries to perform this OpenID Connect protocol federation with any identity provider that supports OIDC protocol like Azure Active Directory or Okta or Cognito or Auth0 or any identity provider that supports OIDC protocol. So it takes care of many things which we don't have to worry about, like redirecting to the identity provider or calling the token APIs or validating a token. All these things are taken care by the Spring Boot libraries. The only thing you need to do is add the right libraries, just write a minimum code, Java code, to make this integration work. So now let's actually get into the configuration steps. And as usual, I'm going to use my developer account, the developer AzureAD account. I have already logged into my developer account and I will go to my Azure Active Directory console, and I'm going to use Mozilla for testing, and I'm going to use the Spring Tool suite for actually creating a new application, a new Spring Boot application, and then integrate that application with Azure AD. I have already tried a demo, but now I'm going to start from scratch and show you how to create a new Spring Boot application from scratch and then integrate that application with Azure Active Directory. So now let's start with creating a new Spring Boot project and mix certain modifications to integrate it with Azure Active Directory. So I'm using Spring Tool Suite, and if you want to use any other IDE like IntelliJ or Eclipse, that is totally fine. So there is no restriction on which IDE to use. Spring Tool Suite has built-in support for Spring Framework, and that is the reason why I'm using it. Otherwise, any IDE should be fine. So let me actually switch to a different workspace and start the project. So I'm going to create a new workspace called SBAD demo. Yeah, it will take few seconds to actually boot up the Spring Tool Suite ID. So let's just wait for it. Yeah, it has created the workspace now. So let's go ahead with the next step of creating a Spring Boot project. So click this create new Spring Starter project and change this type to Maven, and you can name this as springsecurity demo, which is basically Spring Boot Azure Active Directory demo. Go to next and let's add few dependencies. So I'm going to add a Spring Web dependency and then search for security. I'm going to add a Spring Security OAuth 2 client dependencies. Go to next and click finish. So the project got created. Let's just give it a few seconds for the project to get provisioned properly. Yeah, looks like it is. I think it's done. Yes. So the project got created. You can expand all these folders and see what all folders got created. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the Spring documentation and Spring blogs for copying some of the sample code and sample configuration and then start modifying it to integrate with AzureAD. So just search for Spring Boot OAuth 2 sample and you will get this very first link, which is a blog, official Spring blog, which explains how to add a OpenID Connect identity provider to a Spring Boot application. And then I also need the official documentation. So search for Spring Boot OAuth 2, not this one, actually this one, and select OAuth 2 login and core configuration. So let's keep both these pages open and I'm going to switch back and forth between both these blogs and the official documentation to copy some of the configuration and source code and then modify it accordingly to integrate with AzureAD. So this blog, we are not going to use the entire source code. Like I'm going to copy only certain source code which is required for this integration because some of these steps are outdated. And also this blog actually talks about how to integrate Spring Boot with GitHub as the OpenID Connect identity provider. But in our case, it's AzureAD. So I'm not going to use all the source code. I will let you know what all things you need to we can reuse from this blog and what we need to copy from this configuration, the official documentation, all those things. So if you scroll down, you can see the very first step is to create an index.html page. So let's go here and go to static folder. So if you see here, they are asking us to create an index.html page under the static folder. Right click, new file, index.html, and copy this source code, paste it here. So the first step is done. And the next step is copy these dependencies. Go to the maven pom.xml and under the dependencies tag element, add these dependencies and format this file. So the second step is done. And the final step is to add one more dependency called OAuth2-client, but that is already added because if you remember when I created the project, I asked you to select certain libraries like under the security category, under the web category. So it automatically added the dependency here. So we can ignore this step. And here it talks about how to add a new GitHub app to this Spring Boot web application. But in our case, we are going to integrate with Azure Active Directory. So let's skip this step and go to Azure Active Directory to first configure a client application for this Spring Boot app. So basically, when Spring Boot redirects to AzureAD, the AzureAD needs to identify that client application from where the request is coming for authentication. So we need to create a configuration for that Spring Boot client application in Azure Active Directory. And that's what I'm going to do here. I'm already logged into the default directory of my developer account and go to app registrations and click new registration. Let's name it as SBAAD demo app and leave this one as it is. And for the redirect URI, select web and again go back to this documentation. So here it says the redirect URI, which is basically called callback URL, will be in this format. So copy this, go here and replace this value here. Let's actually rename GitHub to AAD and register this app. So now we have actually registered a new application, client application to which represents that Spring Boot client app. So now what we need to do is add the details from this AzureAD to the Spring Boot application so that Spring Boot will know where to redirect the user when the user tries to access this application. So let's go back to the Spring Boot, the console, the Spring Tool Suite console. And now let's actually come to the core configuration section of the official Spring Security documentation. And if you see here, there is one section called completely override the configuration. Not this one, actually not this one. So actually, yeah, this is the section. So configuring a custom provider properties. And here they talk about how to configure a OpenID Connect provider in the application.yaml file. So here when I created this project, by default it created an application.properties file. So I'm just going to rename it. There is no harm in using a properties file, but I feel comfortable with YAML, so I'm using the YAML format. So now open that file and copy this, paste it here. Now here we need to replace certain values. So instead of Okta, we are going to put AAD and change the provider name to AAD. And let's delete all these things. And what we will do is, instead of specifying each and every endpoint, we will use this particular property called issuer-URI to load all the URLs automatically. So if you specify this issuer-URI, Spring Boot will automatically load all the other endpoints like authorization endpoint, token endpoint, all those endpoints using this issuer URI. So now we need to identify the issuer URI for this AzureAD tenant, which is my tenant. And it will be different for each tenant. It's unique value for each tenant. So let's go to the AzureAD documentation and search in Google for AzureAD well-known endpoint. The very first link, if you open the very first link and scroll down a bit, you will see how to get the well-known endpoint for your tenant. So basically, the URL is this one, followed by this one, and you need to replace this tenant ID. So in my case, the tenant ID is, let me check. Yeah, this is the tenant ID. So replace that URL, remove this curly braces and enter. So here you can see all the endpoints like token endpoint, the authorization endpoint, user info endpoint, all those things. So if you look at this configuration, we need to specify the issuer URI. So copy this issuer value and paste it here. So now what Spring Boot will do is it will automatically use this issuer URI and call this well-known OpenID configuration endpoint and load all these URLs. So it does all those things automatically. And if you want to specify each URL separately, you can do that as well by adding a configuration for say token URI like this. So you can do this, but that is not required in this case. Now we need to update the client ID and secret for the client application that we configured in AzureAD for this Spring Boot web app. So go back to this AzureAD console, app registrations, and let me search. I have multiple apps. Yeah, this is the one. So this is the app that I created, SBAAD demo app. So let's go to certifications and secrets to get the secret value. So when you create a new app, there won't be any client secret. So you need to create it. I will name it as V1. So it created a new client ID and secret. So copy this client ID, client secret, and paste it here. And for the client ID, go to the overview section of this demo app and you will see a application client ID. Copy that and paste it here. So that's it. We are done with the basic configuration to integrate a Spring Boot web application with AzureAD using OpenID Connect protocol. So now we can actually test it. But before testing, let's go to Azure Active Directory and create a new test user for this particular testing. I already have multiple users, but I will anyway create a new user. Yeah, you can enter any password. I am actually entering my own password. And next, properties, first name, last name, and then email, and review and create. So I created a new user for testing and we already have the Spring Boot app here. So let's go ahead and start the Spring Boot app. So select this demo application.java, right click, run as Spring Boot app. So the application started. So let's go to the Mozilla browser. That's where I'm going to test. And after every test, I will clear the cookies using this plugin. It's a very handy plugin, which I generally use for clearing the cookies. You can use any plugin for clearing the cookies or even the Mozilla browser settings. So go to localhost 8080. Oh, we have, okay, I missed one step. So if you look at this error, it says the Spring Boot application actually redirected to Azure Active Directory, but the scope parameter was missing in the request URL. So let's go back here, stop. And if you come back to this documentation, you can actually pass scope parameter using this attribute called scope under the OAuth2 client registration ID in the YAML file. So this is the one. So we need to pass OpenID plus profile plus email. Save it, rerun the application. Now let's again access localhost colon 8080. It redirected to Azure Active Directory login page. and I created a new user if you remember in the previous step. So let's copy that user profile. Actually, it is not showing up here, so refresh the screen. Yeah, you can see it here. Copy that user principal name, paste it here. Oh man, sorry. Next, and enter the password that you gave while creating the user. It will ask you to reset the password because this is the very first time I'm logging in using this user. Okay, so you can see when I try to access this app for the very first time, AzureAD will show this consent screen where it says, as a user, if I'm okay with sharing my basic profile details like name, username, email address with this particular application called SB app, AAD demo app. So once I click accept, I am logged in. So actually I'm logged into the application. Like even though you don't see any user details here, I'm actually logged into the application. We will do some enhancement to show the user details. So now let me clear the cookies and show you one more thing. So instead of just typing localhost 8080, if you type localhost 8080/login without a trailing slash, Spring Boot will automatically show a login page. And if you look at this login with OAuth 2.0, it shows the issuer URL here. So if you go here, this is the issuer URL that I gave and it displays that URL. So if you want a friendly name instead of this issuer URL, again go back to the documentation. You can give a custom client name. So I will go here, stop the server, and I'm going to name it as AzureAD. I will name it as login with AzureAD. Restart the server. And go here, refresh the page. Now you see login with AzureAD. So now I can select and I will use that same user ID and I will use the password. I'm logged in again. So I will clear the cookies again and let's go to the next step of displaying some user details in this page so that we know that the user logged in. Right now, the user logged in, but nothing is displayed in this page because we are not reading the user details. So go back to this blog and scroll down a bit and it has instructions on how to add a welcome page which will display the user details. So copy this code, go here and again go back to index.html and within the body tag add that and copy this code, add it and format it. And we need to add a new endpoint in the demo application to read the user details from the server side and display it in the HTML page. So copy that, go to demo application.java, paste it here. And you need to import these packages. So let's select this. Yeah, it's imported. Yeah, actually, if you do a Control Shift O, it imports everything, but it was a bit slow. That's why I was importing one by one. So now all the packages are imported. I added a new endpoint called /user, and don't forget to add this add REST controller annotation. So that is also added. So stop the server, and I don't think we need to do anything else. Just stop the server and restart. And make sure you are already logged out. Yes, I'm logged out. Type /login without the trailing slash and log in with AzureAD. User, and now you can see my username here, the same username that I gave here. Sorry, it's not the username, it's basically the display name. So SBAAD demo. So you can see that here. And I will show you some additional things which will be helpful for you. So I will again clear these cookies, and I will explain this end-to-end flow now based on what we saw in this diagram. So when I access localhost 8080, so let me open a new browser, and yeah, so I'm now redirected to the AzureAD login page. So if you see the URLs here, when I logged in, when I typed localhost 8080, it automatically redirected to the AzureAD OAuth 2 v2.0 authorize endpoint, which is what I have shown in this diagram in the step 2. And it passed certain parameters like client ID, scopes, response type, all those things. And now when I logged in, here you can see after successful login, AzureAD actually redirected back to my Spring Boot web application with the authorization code, which you can see here in step 6. And the Spring Boot web application did a backend API call to the token endpoint to get the access token ID token. And the username that you see here is actually coming from the ID token. And the ID token will have lots of other attributes as well, which you're not seeing it here, because if you look at this source code, we are only displaying the username and not all the other attributes. But if you want to check that, you can start this server in debug mode, and you can put a debug endpoint here where it returns the user's name. So just put a debug endpoint there. And the server has started. Now refresh this page, and here switch, like since I have put a debug endpoint, it automatically came here. And if you look at this object and attributes, here you can see all the values of this user. So if you look at this list of attributes, you see the subject ID of this user, which is this one. You can go back to the AzureAD console, and maybe somewhere it should be there. So just, yeah, I don't know where it is, but somewhere that subject ID should show up. I think it's not displayed here, but I'm not sure where exactly the subject ID will be displayed. But anyway, so if you come back here, you can see the name of this user, which is SBAAD demo. So you can see it here, the display name. You can see the family name demo, given name as SBAAD. That's what you can see here, first name, last name. And you can see the email address, which is sbaaddemo@example.com. And that is the email address that I gave. So all these values are available to you in the Spring Boot web application, and you can use these attributes to display the user details here and then log in the user to your app. So this is how you do the end-to-end configuration between the Spring Boot web application and Azure Active Directory. And it is very easy, as I showed you here. With very minimal code, you can add an authentication layer on top of your Spring Boot web application using a OpenID Connect identity provider. As usual, this involves lots of steps and you might get stuck somewhere or you will have some questions. So please feel free to post your questions or comments in this YouTube video and I will be happy to respond. I hope you enjoyed watching this video and please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thank you.